night, I grew up in Petone, and I belonged to the Petone entertainment group. And so we'd been busy entertaining the troops. In the early days, of course, it was our own troops, Trentham and Fort Dorset. And then when the Marines came, it was Judsford and Pautanui and Paekakariki, and we'd entertain them and then be entertained ourselves at the officers' mess. Dancing to the String of Pearls and Glenn Miller and all the other things. But I worked in those days as a young girl at Whitcomb and Tombs in Wellington Quay in the office, and I'd noticed an ad in the paper from the 2nd Marine Division wanting drivers with a heavy-duty licence and plus clerical staff. And the pay was considerably more than I was being paid. And so I applied. I even sort of went to the trouble of getting a driving licence, a heavy-duty driving licence, if you please. Even though we didn't have a car, I talked my uncle into teaching me to drive his heavy-duty truck. But however, when I arrived at the time, they found I was working in the office at Whitcomb and Tombs. They said, "No, we have a job for you in the Ordnance and Munitions warehouse in Seaview." That's where they had a lot of their supplies. And if you remember where it is, Seaview, right? They built all those huge warehouses. I think lately they've just been putting them up for sale. So the head of the section was a Captain Arthur Rose. And when he learnt that I was only 17 years of age, he came out to visit my mother, we lived in Jessie Street, Petone, and assured her that I would be under his guidance and for the whole time, personally. And he would pick me up every morning. We lived in Jessie Street, and they were actually stationed at Camp Anderson at Kaiwara. That's where their headquarters were then. And they used to come in their covered truck. And Jessie Street at that time was the last street that you go up before you went over the old pipe bridge. That was the old bridge that went over to Seaview. So every morning, right on the dot, this big heavy truck with all these men would arrive, and I would sort of be escorted right inside, and every evening I would be delivered at my door. So my mother was very impressed with his integrity, which proved very correct, because I worked in a small office with 2 officers and Captain Rose and a staff sergeant, and then there was a mezzanine floor that had the optical section. That was all the gun sights and everything like that. And then there was the main huge warehouse where there was a lot of men there and all that. And so and then there was another warehouse that had a lone woman, and that was the engineers section. There were 2 other, the warehouses were huge. And then there was a very large one that had 4 other girls in it. They all worked together in the general office. But midday, looking at that equipment, you didn't have the tray, the dining tray. We were provided with a hot meal every day. We lined up with the boys with our tray with an indentation, you know what I'm talking about, and your hot meal would be slopped into this, and then there was room for the dessert, which was ice cream slop, and then something else, usually fruit. But Harry mentioned our mutton. Well, the first I ever had mutton, I could tell why they couldn't stand it. You could smell it cooking to start off with. It was awful, just awful. I felt I should have given them my mother's recipe or my grandmother's recipe. It's something their cooks never did learn to prepare properly. But I must say it was the most interesting experience. And Captain Rose was an absolutely wonderful man. He had been a college teacher during peacetime, And as you mentioned, a lot of the men were very young, only 18 and 19, and he used to give them special lessons in the evening back at Camp Anderson. But he was a very fine man, and I must say, the whole time that I was there, they were disciplined. He was, he was diligently watched over me, and a lot of those men, they'd whistle out and call out to me, but very respectfully. There was always somebody watching over my shoulder, but they had a huge map of the Pacific Ocean with all these tiny. I was looking at some of the books of Taro and some of those other places, and there were flags with one were the lines of battle. And there would be the US flag and the Japanese flag, and they would cover whatever it was. Now, the system that I worked with was a requisition system, and so that we kept a filing system of all the stock that, when I say stock, but it was all the ammunition and everything. And when I first started there, of course it was fairly new, but that filled up very rapidly as the position in the Pacific changed, and there was a turnaround when they started then regaining these islands that they lost. And as far as I was concerned in my work, it sort of culminated with just before the Battle of Tarawa. And then, of course, and you could feel the tension and the build-up of this. And then the busyness of everything, and finally the warehouse was virtually emptied out. And I don't know who mentioned it about digging up things at Titai Bay or somewhere, equipment, but anything surface for requirement, I think that was surplus to requirement, everything surplus to requirement was buried.
That's right.
And I can vouch for that.
Permission Corey.
That's right. And so I must say, a lot of the men I worked alongside of, they lost their lives. From the preceding months and months and months that went on, regaining their islands at a great cost, I must say. And Captain Rose and I continued with this wonderful friendship. We exchanged Christmas cards and news of our families right until he died. It was about 2 years ago. And I can only say, explain my experience and tell you about my experience with the 2nd Marine Division.
Wonderful.